Great. Thanks so much, Symphony. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today and just for the work that you are doing with young people in California or outside of California. We're really excited to have some people from other states joining us on the conference today. So I wanted to start off this this day by really kind of focusing on what is happening with young adults when it comes to tobacco use behavior. I'm also going to touch a little bit on cannabis because there is some stuff with marijuana, as we're going to see in California. We have different markers within our California tobacco surveys that we do here versus the marijuana or cannabis surveys, and then also some national. But it's really important to be having this conversation collectively. And you'll hear me mention throughout the presentation why we should be not only having conversations with young people about tobacco, but also about cannabis use. So I really just want to set the stage on what's happening. We're going to be going into a brief history of college issues. It's really important to understand this as it's shifting because it's kind of shifting back to where we previously were. I've been working in this field for over 20 years, and we've been having some listening sessions lately, and it's been a little bit overwhelming with college students because we're having some flashbacks to some of the things that we were dealing with 20 years ago, which is not really a great thing. So I want to set the stage for that. I am going to go a bit data heavy on everybody and share current prevalence rates so we understand what is going on with young adults and specifically young adults in college communities. And then dive into products and do an introduction to some of the newer things that we're seeing and how these products have been changing, why this is really problematic for young people, and then what are some factors that might be contributing to student tobacco use. So feel free at any time, as Cynthia mentioned, she'll be keeping an eye on the Q&A if you have any questions. And then also, again, our chat is enabled so you can also utilize that function. So I just want to start with the Master Settlement Agreement. If you're new to work in tobacco prevention, you might not be familiar with the Master Settlement Agreement, but this is a really critical part of our history and the work that we do for many reasons. One, also for a state that has legalized marijuana, we oftentimes get people saying, well, how come marijuana companies can advertise on billboards and do all of these things that cigarette companies or tobacco companies can't do? And a lot of that is because of the Master Settlement Agreement. So this is an agreement that was reached between the major cigarette companies and 46 states. There was one 2 years later that was adopted between the smokeless tobacco companies and some states. And now, just as an FYI, the cigarette companies are the smokeless companies, are the e-cigarette companies. They've kind of all combined in, and now their end goal is to sell nicotine and to continue addiction through nicotine use. But what we saw in 1998 was it really set off a change in who was using tobacco products. So at that time, young adults became the youngest legal targets of the tobacco industry. And this is important because while the MSA did a lot of things, one of the things it explicitly did for the industry was that you can no longer legally target to anyone under the age of 18. So if you think back to the days of Joe Camel, that was pre-MSA, after MSA, cartoon characters, any promotion to young people was illegal. So again, obviously the industry is clever and they find ways around this. But this settlement agreement, when that shift happened in the late 90s and the early 2000s, we saw a big uptick in tobacco use among young adults. And the tobacco industry started to create new strategies that they use specifically to reach young adult populations. College communities are a space where a large number of young adults exist. I want to note it's not just college communities. Military populations also have large quantities of young adults. And so a lot of what we see in college communities also happen in military communities. But in the early 2000s, we saw wild things like the industry hosting bar nights near college campuses. They would sponsor fraternities. They would sponsor Greek events. So this is a picture of sponsored bar events. This is also a picture of skull and a Greek symbol. I went to UC Davis, and I remember a good friend of mine, her partner He was part of the AGR fraternity. And I remember that they used to give him, because he worked for US Smokeless Tobacco, and he would get a big magnetic can of Skoal that he would put on the side of the van. And then they would drive to student housing and pick up students and bring them back to the party. And then at the parties or at any of these bar events, they would hand out free products. So lots of mischievous behavior by tobacco companies at that time. They also would give scholarships of college rodeo athletes. They would sponsor these events so that their signage would be up around the arenas where rodeo athletes were competing. They would do couponing, which is still a very common practice today that we get through all of the companies. My birthday was just the other day, and my kids were baffled why I got so many cards from all of the different tobacco companies. And they're like, Mom, how come you're getting birthday cards with these things and them from the companies? And it's because I'm on all of the industry lists, and they sent me birthday messages with really good coupons so that I could go and purchase their products. They also most recently were trying to put vending machines in fraternity houses in the LA area. We know this because we have partners in the city attorney's office, and they let us know anytime anybody reaches out and asks to do something within a college community to see if it's legal. And this is something that was happening when there was a massive uptick in use of Juul products. And then another way that they continue to do outreach and support of campuses is through job recruitment. So this shows that these companies are legitimate partners in the communities and that they're good businesses and good employers. So they go to campuses and try to recruit students to work for them. What all of these things did was it created a culture of use, and it also did something for the industry where it made them again seem like they were a good company and a good partner to universities, and allowed them to use the names of universities for a variety of reasons, which is a whole other talk I'm not going to get into today. But if you're interested, reach out and I can share that with you. But what we saw in the early 2000s was that tobacco use, and this really at the time was cigarette smoking, it changed from daily use to non-daily or social use. So students would talk about how they only smoked or they only used tobacco when they were out drinking with friends, where they were at a fraternity party, when they were stressed or something else, but they only used it at certain times. And the challenge with that is that mentality made it really tricky when it came to dealing with tobacco treatment, because people didn't think they needed to quit. They didn't think they were addicted if they were only smoking when they were drinking or only smoking when they were out partying. And so what we had to do is we really had to reframe the messages that we were using so that we could try to denormalize the use in all spaces and all settings. But also, how did we focus on supporting young people in trying to make a quit attempt and then being successful in quitting if they didn't think that they were tobacco users? They didn't self-identify as being tobacco users. And so a lot of the work that we did was very successful. And I say we as a collective, this is not just CYN or California, but nationally, there was a lot of work, and there still is a lot of work in college spaces, and specifically looking at young adult tobacco use to support young people in never starting and in quitting completely. And that work has been successful. And you can see in 2011, about 19% of young adults at the national level reported tobacco use. And by 2017, we dropped to just over 10%. So that work had been successful, and we were doing a lot of really, really good things. However, around that same time, we experienced a vaping epidemic, and this continues today. Something that was directly associated with this vaping epidemic was the change in systems, the change in vaping devices, and the type of solutions that were being used in those vaping devices. So when Juul was introduced, what they did was they switched from these larger tanks or larger devices that had larger battery packs and created more aerosol. That aerosol was the larger quantity of aerosol was needed because they were using a freebase nicotine solution. And so they needed to get larger amounts of the aerosol to get more nicotine into their systems. And then Juul came, they said, hey, let's change the formula of the nicotine solution, make it a salt-based solution. And then we can still deliver the same amount of nicotine, if not more, into the system, but using smaller devices so they're easier to hide. What Juul also did was they hit social media and they had a lot of different campaigns that were geared towards younger audiences. And the result in 2017, 2018, and then 2019, we had a significant increase in youth vaping. So this is National Youth Tobacco Survey data, and this is of high school students. So you can see that orange line is cigarette use, and then the bluish line is vaping or e-cigarette use. So again, you can see that those numbers for vaping kind of fluctuated from the time it was introduced in the United States. And then we hit that epidemic. Juul's introduced 2018. We're at close to 21% of young people report vaping. And by 2019, we had approximately 28% of youth who reported current, so past 30-day use of an e-cigarette. And why this is important is because we're now seeing those numbers drop among teens, which is very good news. However, it's critical to note that those young people who are at the height of the vaping epidemic in 2019, those are today's young adults. And so oftentimes in tobacco prevention, we focus a lot on what's happening within youth audiences, and it's critical that we continue that work through young adulthood, as we know that that actually is a point in an individual's life where they're likely to continue experimentation and that addiction is setting in. So what's happening at the national level? These data are from the Monitoring the Future study, which is out of the University of Michigan. This is a great study because they look at 19-year-olds to 60-year-olds, but they also track it by individuals who are in college and then young adults who are not currently in college. So this is youth or young adults, specifically 18 to 22-year-olds. And so you can see that with college students, and this is vaping of nicotine. So college students, they've stayed pretty consistent. There was definitely a jump between 2017 and 2019. And then it's been hovering at about 19% since 2019. At one point, young adults in college actually had higher rates of vaping than young adults who were not attending a college. And you can see that that shifted in 2020 and it remains higher than those who attend college. What's interesting with this is looking at cigarette use. So we have officially closed the gap now on cigarette smoking among individuals in college and those who do not attend college. So there's been a pretty good decline among both populations. You'll see that there was a big drop for college students in 2020 that could be associated with the pandemic, although it's ticked back up. But why this is really important is because college attendance actually used to be a protective factor for students to prevent tobacco use. So you could see even in the early 2000s, when I talked about the Master Settlement Agreement passing and young adults becoming the youngest legal targets, we did see, some increased rates of use in the early 2000s among college students. But then we were seeing that go down. But now we're looking at there's this protective factor of college is no more. So what is happening now that students are continuing to use at the same rate, and especially with cigarettes, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. And then this is looking at marijuana rates and also comparing students versus young adults who are not in college. And you can see that the rates are higher among young adults who do not currently go to a college or university. However, there's been pretty consistent numbers across the board over the last 10 years or so. So looking at California data, so this is a lot. There's a lot of information on here, but I wanted to include dating back to 2017. So again, 2017 is right before that vaping epidemic. So that's the beginning of the introduction of Juul. So what has been happening since then? So this is disaggregated data by age group. So we're looking at 18 to 25-year-olds, and this is from the California Health Interview Survey, which is administered by UCLA Center for Health Policy Research. So if you're looking just at the second chart right there on the screen of tobacco use, you can see for young adults, there was a big increase in 2018. Again, this is pretty consistent with what we saw at the national level, although 2019 was the peak for use among youth populations. But since 2017, we've changed quite a bit, some again related to the pandemic, but where we're at in 2022 is about 13.8% of 18 to 25-year-olds in California are reporting current tobacco use. So cigarette use, the good news is it has gone down. There was a slight uptick in 2021 from the prior year, but we're still a lot lower than we were in 2017. But when you look at the e-cigarette rates, we have again had some fluctuation there, but in the last year, our numbers were actually higher than they were in 2017. So that really shows a space where we still have more work that we need to be doing. And then looking at marijuana, again, it's fluctuated since 2017, but it stayed about even. I do want to note in all of the surveys that we've looked at, the CHIS survey in California, the ACHA-NACHA survey, which is a college-specific survey, and the Monitoring the Future, marijuana continues to be the most used substance other than alcohol among college student populations. So also looking at California tobacco use, I want to look at this from an age perspective. So young adults are classified as adults in our state data, also oftentimes in our federal data or national data. And so this is overall 18 plus, so 18 and older in California. This is those who currently use tobacco or used it within the past 30 days. So you'll see that young adults have the second highest rate of tobacco use of any tobacco use compared to 26 to 44-year-olds. They have the highest rate. But when you look at it by type of product that's being used, that group, the 26 to 44-year-old as well as 45 to 64-year-olds, have higher rates of cigarette smoking. So young adults are still smoking less than any other population and adult population. Young adults do have a higher cigarette smoking rate, though, of youth. I believe the youth number is just under 2%. However, young adults have the highest vaping rate of any age group population in California. So you can see this broken down by adult populations. So they're 11.5% compared to the group that actually has the highest tobacco use rate, which is just over 7%. And youth in California, the most recent data showed that about 5.6% of high school aged youth in our state are vaping. So the young adult population has the highest rate, and it's significantly higher than what we're seeing elsewhere. The other thing that I think is important to know, and what I want you to pay attention here, is the blue line on the top and then that teal line that's right over. So right under that. So this is the frequency of e-cigarette use in the past 30 days. Again, these data are specific to young adults. So we pulled out 18 to 25-year-olds. And why this is important is because you can see in 2017 and 2018, young adults were reporting, again, that social use, the non-daily use. But as we progress in years, we're seeing more young adults reporting everyday use or past 11 to 29-day use. And that is concerning because that is directly associated with using because of addiction. And I'll get into more of what we're seeing with these different products and the types of devices that are out there. So what are young people using? And this is where things get a little bit scary. As I mentioned, our team has been doing listening session with college students, and after every single one, I kind of have to take a minute and just process what we're hearing, because it's a little bit overwhelming what they're telling us about different product use and what they're seeing their peers using on campuses. So what we know is that tobacco products, nicotine products, and marijuana products are constantly changing. This makes it really difficult to be having conversations with young people about tobacco and nicotine and marijuana. Our language is really important. What we say and how we say it is important. We're kind of in this place right now in public health when we're having all these conversations on vaping, and yet young people are starting to use other products that are not vaporized. So that changes how we do prevention and how we do treatment. And I'll mention that in a second. The other thing that we know is that all of these products are higher in nicotine levels and also THC levels. The higher nicotine concentration of the products leads to increased addiction. And we also know that they're getting bigger. So when Juul first started, each pod had about enough nicotine solution for 200 puffs. That was the equivalent to a pack of cigarettes, which has 20 cigarettes in it by law, and each cigarette has about 10 puffs. And so that was 200 puffs per pack, 200 puffs per Juul pod. Now the largest device that we found has up to 15,000 puffs in it. The challenging thing with this is it allows people to share their devices. They do a lot of passing it along. It makes it more accessible and easier for young people to get access to. So this is just to show you a comparison of Juul, which again was really the first device that was successful in replicating nicotine delivery similar to that of cigarettes. That's what Juul said their goal was to have people who smoked cigarettes switch to their product without having the nicotine cravings that they needed to then go back to cigarette smoking. What they did in the process of that goal, if that was their goal, was they also ejected a new generation of nicotine users. And then Puff Plus, Puff bars are very popular. Puff, the company, has said that they no longer sell nicotine products in the state of California. However, we know that there are so many illicit devices that are still on the market. Just 2 days ago in LA, the FDA seized over $700,000 worth of vaping devices from a retailer in that county. So we know that these products are still out there. And Puff Bar, before they went to their non-nicotine products in our state, they actually had 4 different versions of their devices. And this Puff Plus was the 4th version that they had. And it had 5,000 puffs of aerosol in it with 550 milligrams of nicotine, which is almost 14 times the amount of nicotine that was in one Juul pod, which again, one Juul pod was supposed to replicate the experience of smoking a pack of cigarettes. So when we look at the amount of nicotine that young people are getting and they're exposed to and they're able to get access to, it's highly concerning, especially since you look at this one device, this Puff Plus, that has 14 times the amount of nicotine as a Juul pod or a pack of cigarettes. This is one device, and if you had to pay taxes on one device versus taxes on 14 packs of cigarettes, it's a considerable cost compared to what we're paying for any of these. But it's not just vaping anymore. This is actually something we're paying a lot of attention to because the industry has really embraced the oral nicotine market. So we have smokeless tobacco. This is ground up tobacco leaves that are designed to be put in your lower lip. These have been around for a long time. We know there are certain demographics of individuals that use smokeless tobacco, rural communities, primarily males, oftentimes white males, athletes. So there's been a big focus on June prevention within those communities when it comes to smokeless use. In the early 2000s, there were huge marketing campaigns in California from R.J. Reynolds to introduce Camel Snus. And snus was pre-vaping, and so there was starting to be an increase in what we saw. This is ground up tobacco. It's ground to about the consistency of espresso, and it's designed to be put in your top lip so that you don't have a need to spit, and then you just replace the nicotine pouch when you need a fresh hit of nicotine. More recently, though, we have pouches from Zyn. These are nicotine pouches. They are tobacco leaf free, which means the nicotine in them is a synthetic nicotine powder that's made in a lab. And Zyn is owned by Philip Morris International. They have taken over the United States market. They're actually in competition with Altria, who is Philip Morris USA. Altria sells on, and Zyn has really become a whole thing in the United States. It's similar to snus in that it's designed to be put in your top lip so that you don't have the need to spit. And then when you're done with the pouch, you just take it out. And then when you want another one, you replace it. But it's not just these products. We have now nicotine gum that's not approved as a nicotine replacement therapy. We have lozenges. We have nicotine gummies. We even have nicotine cotton balls that are just synthetic cotton soaked in nicotine solution. Each one has a milligram of nicotine in it, and you can pack your top lip with however many cotton balls that you want to get that hit of nicotine, and then you just scoop it out when you're over. And it's not just Zen who's on the market. So actually, I'm going to
What was
go.
it?
Okay, I'll decide to show all of the other ones. But before I do, I want you to get a sense of what's happening with Zen. And when we've been doing our listening sessions with college communities, this is one of the top products that is discussed, and it is discussed by brand name. So it's not nicotine pouches or oral tobacco, it is Zen. Everyone's using Zen. We have Zen cans at parties. People pass them around. So I want to just share this video, and then we'll talk a little bit about what's so concerning about it.
People who Zen are f***ing psychopaths. The first time I Zenned, I think like most people, I was hammered. The second time was the next day. So me and the boys are out shooting 18. One of my buddies throws one in. I'm like, yo, toss me one. He's like, it's a 6. It's a bit of a different beast. I'm like, oh, I had one last night. No big deal. I throw one in. It was a big deal. I kid you not, 3 minutes later, I can barely walk. We finish the hole. I get in the cart, projectile vomit all over the cart path, multiple times. I really don't understand how you guys just push through that phase, but it's kind of respectable because unlike drinking where you get that immediate gratification first and then pay for it later, you're enduring that pain on the front end just to get that sweet, sweet Nicky buzz. So it makes sense to me that people who Zen would be more likely to be successful. People who Zen are f***ing psychopaths.
So as you can see, I shared that video also with our team at CYN, and the first thought was like, okay, this could be a prevention video. And he turns it at the end that no, this is respectful. And unfortunately, this video is one of so many that you can find on TikTok. One of the things that I found to be so concerning about watching that, not only watching the video, but were the comments that were associated with the video. So people who were saying like, dude, you're weak. I use like 2, 3, 4 pouches at a time. This is silly. You can't handle 1 6-milligram pouch. And so what it was showing is that young people are using these. They're using these when they're out golfing. They're using these when they're out partying. They're pairing it with alcohol. They're pairing it with caffeine, and just the culture again around the use of Zen. And one of the things that we're seeing specific to this one product is it has been embraced by social media influencers. And so you can see I put just a couple of the different hashtags that are there. There's entire accounts that are just dedicated to Zen and creating videos of what people experience while they're using Zen. It's a different demographic than what we see with other smokeless products. So there's a lot of women who are using it as well. And again, there's just a big culture. And as a result, between 2019 and 2022, there was a 6-fold increase in sales associated with use of nicotine pouches. In addition to that, we also know that the company is really embracing this new culture of use, and people can get points by redeeming the empty 10. So once they finish the 10s, they can collect rewards and points, and they get discounts and promotions, and you can get free products like Apple devices or other things for collecting your 10s. And all of these different nicotine pouches, they range in strength levels. So Zen, what we're seeing in the United States is that they have 3 milligram and 6 milligram, but there are other products that have up to 15 milligrams of nicotine per pouch. Again, a cigarette, an individual who smokes absorbs 1 to 2 milligrams of nicotine per cigarette. Each of these pouches have 15 milligrams, and the cans vary in size from 15 to 20 pouches per can. So this is just a look of what is on the market right now. So again, Zen is from Philip Morris International, On is from Philip Morris USA or Altria, and Velo is from RJ Reynolds. And then these other ones are just smaller companies that are not in the tobacco business, but more so in the nicotine business and finding a market and being able to get these out. Like other tobacco and nicotine products, these are all flavored unless, again, there's a state law that prohibits the distribution and sale of flavored products. With that said, and I'll get into this later, enforcement's tricky. So we know that many of these are still on the market in California communities. And then just to close out on new products, I do want to bring up the IQOS, which is a heat not burn tobacco product. This has been approved for sale as a new tobacco product in the United States. It will be regulated similar to a cigarette. This is being produced by Philip Morris International, and it's their goal in the United States to have 10% share of the cigarette and heated tobacco market through this one device. This has been very successful outside of the United States. They believe it to be very promising in the United States because we are a country that has embraced vaping. And so this looks very promising. What this does is it's a tobacco stick that you put into the device and it heats up just to the point before combustion. So it creates like an aerosol almost of tobacco smoke, but it's not smoke because it's not burned. And so it's supposed to be an alternative to smoking, and the industry promotes this as being a safer alternative to cigarette smoking. Okay. And then I want to say that it's not just tobacco products or nicotine products that are constantly changing. We have so many different marijuana or cannabis products on the market. There's edibles, there's vaping devices, there's combustible products like paper wraps and tobacco wraps, hemp wraps, paraphernalia, pipes, different things. And then we have other things like capsules and sprays. So these markets are constantly changing. It makes it really intriguing for young people. And access. So what I mentioned with access, this is a huge issue that we're dealing with in California. So again, as the devices get bigger or the cans get bigger, there's a lot more sharing of the different products among young people. So looking at our California data, we know that about half of the youth who reported vaping in the past year, they didn't actually pay for their vaping devices. They were just borrowing them from friends. They were getting access to them in different ways. We know that young people are purchasing products in stores. They have other people purchase them for them. And some are definitely getting them online. And when we look at the underage sales rate that's happening, in 2018 in California, our sales rate of underage was 5.4%. In the last year, it was just about 22%. And that's actually a drop from the year prior. And some people are associating this significant increase in violations due to Tobacco 21. And now purchasers are 18 and 19-year-olds. And so it's easier for retailers to sell to them. But even with that, they're still underage and legally should not be buying these products under the age of 21. So access remains a significant issue. And we also know that a huge challenge is that many of these retailers are located near colleges and universities in California. And oftentimes the public health policies that we work on have proximity pieces to them so that we don't have vape shops or tobacco shops within a certain distance from a K-12, but oftentimes we do not include colleges and universities in those efforts. And so as a result, companies are always looking at what are some new ways that we can get products to young adults. Again, in California, young adults are a target market. They have the highest vaping rate of any age group population. And so now our team has been doing a research project. We're just in the middle of this project with this company called Duffel. It's actually a couple of companies, but we are exploring what are the practices of these delivery companies. Companies are delivering products directly to students on college and university campuses, and that's 100% of their market. So the one company that we are looking at is called Duffel. Duffel is currently at 6 universities in California. When we started this project earlier this year, they were at 4. They've since added 2 new universities, and we know that they have intention of 3 more that they've already named within our state. But when we first started tracking them a couple years back, they were only in California. They've now expanded to Arizona, Texas, and they just opened up a new retail operation near Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. So they are growing and they are expanding. The way that they operate is they have a retail store that is located across the street or very close to a major university. They operate as a local retailer. However, their sales are only done through an app or an online store. Once a student purchases a tobacco product online or through their app, they have student gig workers who deliver an assortment of products. It's not just tobacco. It's like convenience stores, snacks, drinks, different things. But they deliver them within 10 to 15 minutes. And so the key to this is that they are right by colleges and only delivered to housing near colleges, Greek life, or directly to the campuses. So our team is currently involved in monitoring these sales and these activities, and what's going on and what are the products that they're accessing. It's not just Duffel. There's another company as well called Snag. The only university that Snag is connected to in California at this time is at UC Santa Barbara. But again, they're in other states. And so our team is tracking what's happening in California. We are not monitoring the sales practices in other states, but we are doing this project. We're currently underway. Our team is doing 2 levels of observation. So the first is store observations. This is a screenshot from the UCLA store. This is a couple of months ago. UCLA, for some reason, the store has removed all of their vaping devices recently. So it's really interesting. We have coded data since September through last week of the different products, so we're able to see all of the things. But this is a California-based store. This is recent information, so you can see these products in our state are not legal. Almost all of these are flavored. So that is highly problematic, but again, makes it very, very accessible for students. So student gets on their app, orders a flavored flume device, 10 minutes later, a student delivers it to them. In addition to the vaping devices, they also have an assortment of Zyn. Interestingly, and during this year, since the beginning of the year, they've almost solely transitioned from all smokeless brands to just Zyn as their singular product. And at one point in the year, their other tobacco section was just called Zyn. So they've rebranded it now, and all of these products are under after hours. And then most recently, they've started to add paraphernalia to be used with cannabis products. And it's not just companies that are delivering tobacco. There's also another company called Unibud, which is delivering cannabis products to colleges and universities, primarily right now in LA universities. And the big concern that we have with that is that cannabis use on colleges and universities is still illegal at the federal level. We know that UCPD specifically is doing a lot of citations of students who are using or in possession of cannabis products on UC campuses, which is highly problematic because unfortunately that enforcement has focused on primarily Black and brown students. So there's a lot of issues with this, a lot of concerns and implications around the practices of these companies. And so with that, one of the things that we're trying to track is we're trying to track the compliance of the companies with SB 793, but also local ordinances and the federal PACT Act. So our SB 793 again covers most, but not all flavored tobacco and nicotine products, and also flavored vaping devices as well. What we know and what we're seeing in different jurisdictions with our current project is there's just limitations in capacity to enforce this current law. And so, for example, in some of the larger jurisdictions where there's not strong enforcement or a local retail license where they have added fees to fund enforcement, those communities are more likely to have flavored products, whereas smaller communities that have stronger enforcement or stronger retail license ordinance at that level are more likely to not have flavored products. So it's really, really interesting to kind of track those different things. And then just across the board with our flavor ban, it's very confusing. And I know that there's some work going on at the statewide level right now. There's some efforts trying to get a list of flavored products because the industry is constantly changing names and packaging designs. And it just creates a lot of confusion for on the legal side, but then also for local retailers of what they can and cannot sell. So I'm just going to close all of this out as we talked about what does the prevalence data look like with young adult population? What are the challenges that we have with all of these different devices? And then what are other things that could be contributing to the higher rates of tobacco use and vaping among young adults? So the first is that we have renormalized smoking and vaping and use of tobacco and cannabis in our state. And so the higher rates of vaping that we see, the more people vaping or now using Zen, the more we see it, the more it feels normalized as part of this is our society. The more we see the advertising and the marketing and the hookah shops that are near colleges and universities, the more normalized that behavior is. And the more normalized the behavior is, the more likely people are to be open to experimenting with the use of those products. The other thing is that there's some challenges when it comes to regulation and funding. So I talked about the master settlement agreement and some of the protections that we have around advertising and marketing because of that agreement. And that doesn't cover all of the different cannabis products. And so now we see advertising and marketing of cannabis products near schools, on billboards, on bus stations. It's kind of all over the place. And so it creates this confusing thing of, okay, well, tobacco is bad, but cannabis is okay. It creates this mixed message for a lot of communities and populations. The other challenge that we have with that too is that we know that the cannabis industry in California is growing and is increasing their power as well. And there's been efforts in the state legislature last year, and again, there's active legislation this year to roll back our indoor air laws and weaken those so that individuals can smoke cannabis in their retail spaces where they're also selling food and beverages. And this is something that advocates here have worked really hard to do from tobacco retailers. Another challenge is that there's just differences in funding and how we do prevention and treatment when it comes to treating tobacco versus treating marijuana. And oftentimes we have different protocols for treating the two different substances, but the populations that we work with are using them together. And so we'll talk to young adults who tell us, yep, we have friends that are vaping or using Zen during the day to stay alert, and then they're smoking weed at night to kind of calm down and to help them sleep. So we've got to be having these conversations together about the products. But it's a challenging thing because we are getting guidance from different public health agencies on how to deal with tobacco versus how to deal with cannabis. And some of that's at the federal level and some of that's at the state level. And as a result, we have inconsistent screening, asking questions about tobacco use versus marijuana use. We have inconsistent guidance. So any use of tobacco results in a provider encouraging a quit attempt. That's not often the same with marijuana or with cannabis use. And then we also have inconsistency in messages with marijuana when it comes to age, right? So if we talk to somebody under the age of 18, we say, oh, don't use this because you're a young person. It's not safe for you, brain development. But at the age of 21, we have legalized use for adult consumption. And so then we're getting the message about safe use for adults. And yet brain development stops at the age of 25. And so it's a bit confusing for young adults specifically of, okay, I'm a young adult, I'm being told it's safe to use for recreational purposes, but only after the age of 21 because of the legality of it, or is it okay before, and at what point? So we need to find synergy between the messages and then how we are doing the screening and what we are doing after that to support people in changing behavior, especially when use is associated with coping with stress or coping with anxiety or depression. This is the number one reason that youth in California report nicotine use specifically is to deal with stress or anxiety. We also know that young people might be using any of these products because they're trying to escape their reality or they're trying to self-harm. And then also just to connect in with peers or within social spaces. We're hearing this a lot again in our college listening sessions that young people are using these at parties. They're smoking again at bars and really creating these social spaces. And then I mentioned this earlier, young people are using this to get the highs from the nicotine to stay focused and alert and get the low from the cannabis to help them kind of chill out and to sleep. And we know that young people, both youth and young adults, have had worsening mental health. It has been worsening over the past 10 years. Much of this is associated to academic stress, college financial anxiety, because it is very, very expensive now to go to college in the United States and especially here in California. And then just a lack of connection. Much of this is from the pandemic, but there's also more studies showing that young people are disconnected from peers because of all of their time on screens. And then we also know that all of these different substances that young people might be using thinking it's helping them is actually making their mental health worse. So it's causing worse symptoms of depression, worse symptoms of anxiety. And so we have a lot of opportunities to work with young people on quitting, but also getting down to root causes of what's causing the mental health, the worsening mental health, or what's leading to the substance use, to fully change that behavior. And so that was a lot of information. Sorry to have to race through, but I wanted to be able to stay on time. But here's my contact information. If you have any questions about anything that I shared today, Symphony's information is here as well. You can contact either of us, and happy to pass along any of the data that I shared or any of the additional information. So thank you so much. I will stop sharing my screen now, and I don't see any questions. So thank you all so much for being here, and I will turn it back to Symphony.